Now, I've watched this and I've lived through an awful lot of this agenda, and there's nothing to beat personal observation. You don't really need the books to see what's happened if you've lived a bit longer, and even to see what's happening today. All you have to do is take what's happening today and say, where is it projected to go? How is it obvious? Where is the direction it's all going in? And you don't have to wait for the big ones to come out at the top and tell you. They're not going to, until it's over and done with. You can see where it's all supposed to head. And people who ignore the United Nations and can't be bothered wading through, and I know it's tough and difficult, wading through the piles and piles and piles of treaties and laws and regulations that they've put out since the end of World War II. If you don't wade through them, you won't know what's going on. It's a form of double think when people think they have a nation, they still have a nation. It's double think election time. And in comes the guy from the other party, and you kicked the last bunch out because you can't stand what they've done. And you were hopeful for them at the beginning too. That's why you vote them in. It's hope, really, isn't it? And it's also disdain for the last bunch that lied about all their promises. And I think things get worse and worse. And you get more global. But it's a double think because they do that. And then during once the new guy is in, you see treaty after treaty after treaty being signed by the new guy via the United Nations. Once in a blue moon, they'll put a little bit in the newspaper that doesn't mean anything to anybody the way it's phrased, a one-liner, a two-liner. And it's meant to be that way. You're not supposed to be informed about what's truly happening, this integration system. Here we have it where countries which have declining populations, and that's the Western countries, have to really bring in massive immigration, they say, to pay off for the national debts. Now, I don't know anybody personally who ever caused the national debts. The only ones who seem to keep borrowing and borrowing are the guys at the tops of governments, and nothing is put towards the people. Should they do this? Should they not? There's no plebeian vote here. There's no consultation. And yet, in so-called primitive tribes, anything major that happens or is going to happen to the tribe, they have to sit and debate it, and everyone must get their word in, and they must all concede or deny what's to happen as a motion. We don't even have that, but we think we're civilized. We think we're better than the primitives. We think that we're better because we get to vote. You get to stick your hand up or mark your X, for somebody you've never heard of before they were put forward for you to pick from. They're approved by the big establishment. And you go and do it anyway. Because why? They tell them, promise them this, promise them. This is what's on their minds. The polls all say, blah, 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 promise them this, promise them that. And so once they're in, they're off signing all these international treaties that are legally binding. And then they're implemented right down to your local level from the federal level. And folk wonder why they have so much interference from the local governments now to do with, my sustainability. Sustainability. I read the article from the United Nations website because so much of the Patriot community was watching what they were up to, and their own site, the United Nations, advised them to start changing the names so as they wouldn't get spooked when they saw Agenda 21 come into their local area. So that all you have to do is do a search on sustainability, and you'll see all the different branches of the same beast involved in your local area. They also don't want private property down the road. And they're going to use rental control even as a form of punishment if you're bad. The internet itself, of course, which will be doing all your banking, everything, will be censored, and it'll be cut off to you if you're bad again, politically incorrect. And who said that? And when was that said? Well, basically, Bertrand Russell said back in the late 40s that a new type of money would be issued. Money is just a tool that we must believe in. And he said it'd be called a form of credits from the government to each individual. Every week, you couldn't save it up, so if you hadn't spent it all by the end of the week, you started off at the same amount the following week. But also, you'd have to pay rent, and of course you're going to pay for all your privileges and your fees and your carbon taxes shortly just for living. You won't be able to pay anything, even buy your food, if you're cut off. That'll all be done through the internet. And he said that'll be used as a form of punishment and for social control. Social control is very important. Now, every government has got representatives, sometimes a board of them, employed full-time to go to the department that they work with at the United Nations for their particular area. The UN has equivalent departments of all national government departments. All of them. Building, everything. And they work with them, and then they come back and they get the treaties signed into law. See, they bypassed sovereignty a long, long time ago. That was the intention of it. And everyone who signed the declaration at the United Nations in San Francisco for all the countries, they knew that. They wrote about it at the time. Scott Reed was one guy in Canada who put his own book out. It was an awful title even. It was, I think it was a Canadian diplomat at the United Nations, or memoirs, blah, blah, blah. And he lived in Toronto. He helped draft up the charter for the United Nations along with Alger Hiss. He said in his own book, he says, make no mistake, our goal is world government. And it was quite open about it back then, these people. And they wanted not just world government, but an expert-led world. They did not believe in basically putting in your own people into government who would fight and bicker and have differences of opinion and all the rest of it representing the people. They wanted literally an efficient, non-democratic system. They said it was time for experts to rule the world. And that's all you get today is experts with their fake climate projectors and projections and that kind of stuff, you see. They can get things done then. And they can also claim most of your money and more money to fulfill their programs. They also, remember, want to distribute the wealth across the world. They've been doing it for years, really. Now they want to step it up. Now these people go on about Africa at the United Nations and poor Africans and all the rest of it. And they're so worried about the women there. They need to get special education for women. Yada. These people are the biggest eugenicists you'd ever meet. They're the biggest racists you'd ever meet, and elitists you'd ever meet. Some of them are black themselves at the top. They believe in Darwinism. And when you believe in Darwinism, you don't necessarily even have any connection to the people you were born within. And people don't get that. It's pure elitism. And they do believe in culling off the unfit, those who are too many. I don't see them putting the factories into Africa. You knew years ago they weren't going to build Africa up. And it's been more money pushed into for other projects. And what money does go in goes to international corporations who set up over there as a secondary or third base. But we're living in such deception because, remember, we are the children. And that's what they say. Well, you can't talk to the general population. They're children, really. Look at them out there with their tattoos and their rings hanging out their belly buttons. And, you can't tell the prostitutes from the normal women anymore. They're all dressed the same. They're all watching music television. They've been told to... Well, basically what's happened is that they've fixed our growth, our maturity. You're fixed about the age of 15 for the rest of your life. That's how it seems. I'm not kidding either. That's how people are fixed. The guys are the same. Sports. Till the day they die, they're watching sports. They're watching international corporations that own massive sports teams where guys are paid millions of bucks each per year for throwing or kicking a ball around. Something children do. Something you grow out of as you grow up. And they knew they'd do this because H.G. Wells talked about it a long time ago. You see, when you take away your manhood, you can only project it through someone else. Someone else who pretends at a weekend to be your tribe and he's fighting someone else. Because in your own life, you have no power at all. And you're putting on that fat gut with all the fast food you eat and the booze you drink. But there you are. Suddenly you see yourself as a warrior for the weekend. What a joke. What a joke. Everyone's been manipulated by science and scientific indoctrination, including their whole psychology. That's a big part of it, the biggest part of it at all. Of all. Now, there's an article I read in August, and it was from Activist Post. It was about 10 signs the U.S. is becoming a third world country. And they went through, it says, by every measure, the U.S. is hanging on by a thread to its first world status. It's actually over. I've read another article actually showing you that. Saddled by debt, engaged in wars on multiple fronts with a rising police state at home, declining economic productivity and wild currency fluctuations all threaten America's future. They give you the general descriptions of the ranking system for world status date, and it goes back to the 1950s. That's when they put up these guidelines for the IMF and so on, and have included countries at various stages of economic development and decline. We'll read some of them when we come back from this break. Hi folks, I'm back and we're cutting through the matrix. Just going through what's happening in the world, the real world. And you've been run by the United Nations and its massive infrastructure that's beneath it for your whole lives. And every major law that's passed in the books of every country, from employment equity to priority hiring to building codes, electrical, plumbing, all that kind of stuff. Everything comes out of the United Nations. Everything. Food laws, everything. And folk don't even know it. They get sidetracked by the oohs and the ahs. What's the oohs and ahs? The oohs and ahs are those things that the media puts out to scare you for a day, and it's forgotten the next day. There's thousands of them. If you want to scour the world, you'll find thousands of them. But they never explain why things are happening to you and your countries and so on in the long term. They never explain that at all. Now, here's some of the signs of a country in decline, going to third world. Rising unemployment and poverty. Unemployment numbers, food stamps and home foreclosures continue to reach new high records in the U.S. elsewhere. The ugly reality of those numbers was recently on display when 30,000 people showed up to apply for public housing in East Point, Georgia, for 455 available vouchers. Fights broke out. People were fainting from the heat while in the line, and riot police showed up to handle the angry poor. It reminds me of Soylent Green. Soylent Green was written and put out and pushed and promoted and paid for by the big boys to scare you into overpopulation and what would happen and all the rest of it. Because the actual title of the book version was Make Room, Make Room. But in the movie form, Soylent Green, they show you these massive kind of bulldozer things, massive things, just shoveling up the people who are rioting in the streets over food. Nothing is new under the sun, you know. It's all predictive programming. Number 2, economic dependence. The U.S. finished 2009 with a debt to GDP ratio of 85%, according to the IMF, another, private corporation owned by the international bankers and under the United Nations, set up along with the United Nations as a part of it, but it's private. So is the United Nations, by the way. It's a private corporation. The current trend projects the United States to finish 2010 at 94% and 2011 at 98%. The 90% level has become the IMF's make or break point for countries hoping to grow their way out of debt. If the government debt load climbs above 90% of GDP, economic growth slows so much that growth is no longer a viable solution for reducing the debt, and the IMF insists then on austerity measures. That's what they insisted on Britain, the US, Canada, and other countries. It's already happened. But it falls right in with the agenda, doesn't it? Austerity. Isn't it odd, too, that when you're down and out and you're hungry and afraid, the Millennium Goals for Agenda 21, and look that up too, Millennium Goals.